I heard my wife call me useful the same way people talk about a ladder after they reach the roof. It was 12:07 in the morning, and I was standing in the hallway outside our kitchen with a folder of revised vendor contracts in my hand, still wearing the wrinkled blue shirt I had put on 17 hours earlier. The house was quiet except for the ice maker dropping cubes into the freezer and Natalie's voice floating through the cracked kitchen door. She was not whispering because she felt guilty. She was whispering because rich houses make people think privacy is something walls automatically provide. "He is not my partner, Brandon," she said. "He is just useful." The words did not explode. They did not need to. They slid under the door and found the one place in me I had been trying not to look at for years. I stood there with the contracts pressed against my palm, contracts I had rewritten because Natalie needed them ready before her morning meeting, contracts for Graham Freight Solutions, the company she called hers on podcasts, in magazine interviews, and at charity luncheons where she smiled beside people who had never seen a loading dock before sunrise. From the kitchen window, I could see the reflection of our marble island, the pendant lights, the imported cabinets, the kind of beautiful room Natalie liked to call proof that we had made it. She forgot that the house was held in a trust one created after our first major loan almost broke us. She forgot the Mercedes in the garage was titled under the company fleet account. She forgot the office downtown, the drivers, the warehouse, the insurance lines, the bank relationships, the contracts, the payroll, the emergency reserves, the very floor beneath her expensive slippers. All existed because I had spent nearly 2 decades doing the work she was too polished to mention. Brandon Pierce's voice came through the phone speaker, smooth and pleased with himself. "Then use him through the transition. Once NG Strategic Holdings is live, you will not need him blocking the vision." Natalie sighed, not sad, not conflicted, only inconvenienced. "I know. Elliot still has operational value. Operational value. Not husband. Not founder. Not the man who slept 3 nights in a warehouse office because a snowstorm stranded 2 routes and someone had to keep the dispatch board alive. Value. Useful. Temporary." I looked down at the folder in my hand. On top was a contract clause I had corrected to protect Natalie from signing away a carrier agreement she did not understand. Even now, I had been useful. The old me would have opened the door and asked what she meant. The old me would have argued, pleaded, tried to remind her of the box truck, the cold warehouse, the broken coffee machine, the night she promised we would make it together or not at all. Instead, I turned around quietly, walked down the back stairs to my office, opened the safe, and took out the documents she had forgotten were not decorative. Operating agreement, house trust, vehicle titles, bank authorizations, buy-sell clause, vendor assignment restrictions. Then I called Miriam Cole, the attorney who helped me build the legal frame Natalie had mistaken for furniture. When Miriam answered, I said, "I need to protect what I built before sunrise." Miriam did not waste time asking if I was sure. Good attorneys know the sound of a man who has already crossed the line between suspicion and proof. "Send me what you have," she said. "Do not confront her yet. Do not touch anything that is not yours. Preserve every message, every draft, every timestamp." I sat at the desk in my basement office while the house above me stayed quiet and beautiful, the kind of quiet that comes from money, insulation, and secrets. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I thought heartbreak would shake. Instead, it focused. I opened my laptop and pulled up the draft Brandon had helped Natalie prepare. NG Strategic Holdings. Clean name. Sharp logo. Empty shell. The plan was not written like theft, because people like Brandon never use ugly words when expensive ones are available. They called it restructuring, brand alignment, leadership modernization, transition efficiency. But under the language, the bones were simple. Move 3 major vendor contracts to Natalie's new entity. Transfer selected staff under a consulting agreement. Reduce my voting power through an emergency board proposal. Keep me involved just long enough to stabilize operations, then make me look outdated when I objected. Useful through the transition. Disposable after. I sent the documents to Miriam, then opened the company operating agreement. Graham Freight Solutions had started with 1 used box truck, a rented bay behind a tire shop in Louisville, and my father's old filing cabinet that smelled like dust and motor oil. Natalie used to sit on that filing cabinet because we did not have a second chair. She answered phones while I drove routes, fixed invoices, chased payments, and learned that logistics is mostly promises made under pressure. At 3 in the morning, when dispatch went sideways and coffee burned in a cracked pot, she would touch my shoulder and say, "If we ever make it, we make it together." I built around that sentence. I made her president because she could speak to clients in a way I never could. I gave her the front office, the interviews, the photos beside clean trucks with fresh decals. I stayed behind the screens, where the calls came in when a driver got sick, a shipment missed a dock appointment, or payroll needed covering before receivables cleared. I thought that was balance. She thought it was ownership moving toward her because I did not demand applause. At 12:36, Miriam called back. "Elliot, the attempted transfer is not authorized. Brandon has no legal standing. Natalie has limited executive authority, but she cannot assign carrier contracts, move fleet assets, or alter voting structure without your written consent as majority managing member." I looked through the small basement window at the dark driveway. The Mercedes sat inside the garage above me, plugged into its charger, shining in a space paid for by the company Natalie wanted to hollow out. "What about the house?" I asked. "The residence is held by Graham Family Trust. She has occupancy rights as spouse, but she cannot borrow against it or transfer control." I closed my eyes. Not relief. Something colder. Confirmation. Miriam continued. "We can send preservation notices tonight. We can alert the bank to attempted unauthorized restructuring. We can suspend Brandon's access if he is using company systems without authorization. We can notify key vendors that assignment requires your signature." I looked at the safe, still open beside my desk, metal shelves lined with the paperwork Natalie once called boring. Boring had just become a lock on every door she thought was already hers. "Do it," I said. "All of it." Upstairs, I heard Natalie laugh softly at something Brandon said. It was a small sound, almost tender, that hurt more than the strategy. Not because of romance, because she had saved that softness for the man helping her erase me. I placed the contracts she had asked me to fix on the desk and pushed them away. For the first time in 18 years, being useful no longer felt like love. It felt like evidence. By 12:52, the first notice went out from Miriam's office, and the clock on my basement wall sounded louder than it ever had before. Each tick felt like a small door closing. Not because I was destroying anything, but because I was finally stopping other people from walking through what I had built as if I was only the doorman. Miriam worked fast. She sent a preservation letter to Natalie's personal email, Brandon's consulting address, and the company's server account he had no business using. She notified the bank that any request to change operating account authority, payroll permissions, or credit lines required my direct written approval. She flagged NG Strategic Holdings as an outside entity with no assignment rights. Then she asked me to forward every message where Brandon discussed vendor transfers, staff movement, or board pressure. I did, one by one, cleanly, quietly, the way I had handled emergencies for 18 years. A missing truck in Indiana. A driver stranded outside Cincinnati. A frozen warehouse door in February. A payroll shortfall when a client paid late. Nobody ever saw the panic because I kept it below the surface. That was my gift. That was my curse. I could make a crisis look like a Tuesday. Upstairs, Natalie's voice had gone lower. She was still on the phone, probably leaning against the marble island, probably looking out at the dark yard like she already owned the morning. I wondered if she remembered Louisville. Not the version she told on stage, with softened lighting and inspirational music under it. The real one. The warehouse bay behind the tire shop with oil stains on the floor and a heater that coughed more than it worked. The box truck that took 3 tries to start when the temperature dropped under 20 degrees. The folding table where we sorted invoices because the desk had collapsed under a printer. Natalie used to wear my old sweatshirt there because the office stayed cold no matter how many space heaters we bought. She would stamp delivery receipts until her wrist hurt, then sit on the filing cabinet and read client emails out loud while I fixed route sheets with a red pen. We were tired all the time. We were broke most of the time. But she used to look at me like the struggle belonged to both of us, not beneath either of us. One night, after we landed our first regional contract, she brought 2 vending machine coffees to the loading dock and said, "Promise me we will never become people who forget the floor we started on." I promised. I kept mine. The company grew because I stayed near the floor. Natalie grew away from it. The first magazine profile called her the visionary president behind a rising logistics brand. She brought it home glowing, and I was proud. Truly proud. I framed the article for her office. I ignored the line that called me her operations support because she said the writer must have misunderstood. Then came the podcasts, the panels, the business dinners, the photos where my work boots looked wrong beside her heels. Brandon entered through that door, smiling like a man offering polish while quietly measuring what could be removed. At 1:11, Miriam emailed confirmation that Brandon's company access had been suspended pending review. I stared at the message for a long second. Pending review. Such calm words for the end of a lie. Above me, Natalie laughed once more, softer this time. I looked at the old photo on my desk, the two of us in front of that first box truck, her arm around my waist, both of us exhausted and smiling. Back then, useful meant needed. Tonight, it meant disposable. I turned the photo face down and opened the next file. At 1:27 in the morning, the fleet portal changed from familiar machinery into a map of betrayal. 48 vehicles, 12 long-haul tractors, 26 box trucks, 6 refrigerated trailers, 3 service pickups, and 1 Mercedes that Natalie called her executive vehicle because calling it a company asset made it sound less glamorous. Every title, lien release, insurance rider, and maintenance contract sat in folders I had built over years of unromantic work. Natalie liked the ribbon cuttings. I handled the registrations. Natalie liked interviews beside clean trucks. I handled the breakdowns, fuel cards, inspections, tire invoices, and calls from drivers who needed someone to answer before daylight. Brandon's restructuring draft treated all of it like pieces on a brochure. Transfer selected fleet assets to NG Strategic Holdings for brand efficiency. Brand efficiency. I read the phrase 3 times until it stopped looking like English. Miriam called again while I was reviewing the vehicle schedule. Elliot, the Mercedes is company titled, correct? Yes, I said. Executive Fleet Classification. Insured under Graham Freight Solutions. Then we can restrict use pending internal review. If she is attempting to move assets without authorization, it should be returned to the company lot. I looked toward the basement ceiling, toward the garage above me where the car sat plugged in, polished, quiet, unaware that paperwork could travel faster than wheels. Issue the notice, I said. Not tonight physically. I do not want a scene at the house. Understood. First thing in the morning. Formal retrieval notice. No confrontation. No confrontation. That phrase became the rail I held on to. I was not going upstairs. I was not opening the kitchen door. I was not asking Natalie why she had reduced 18 years to operational value while standing under lights I paid for with routes I personally drove. The work was cleaner than the pain, so I stayed with the work. At 1:42, I logged into the bank portal through the secure business account and watched Miriam's notice appear in the message center. Attempted. Unauthorized restructure. No changes to signatory authority without majority managing member approval. Freeze pending review on newly requested credit extensions. I had learned banking language years ago because nobody lends money to a man who cannot explain risk. Natalie had learned the word visionary because magazines liked printing it under her photograph. Both skills mattered. Only one kept payroll alive. I pulled up the payroll dashboard next. 132 employees depended on that account. Drivers with kids, dispatchers with mortgages, mechanics who knew every truck by sound. That was what Brandon did not understand. A company is not a logo you can peel off one door and stick on another. It is people trusting that Friday still happens. I sent a note to our controller, Samuel Price, flagged urgent but calm. No disbursements, transfers, vendor reassignment, fleet retitling, or executive reimbursements outside normal schedule without my approval until council completes review. His reply came 7 minutes later. Understood. I was waiting for this. That sentence made me lean back in my chair. I was waiting for this. Not because Samuel was disloyal. Because people who do the real work always feel when the front office starts confusing applause with authority. At 2:03, Brandon's access to our domain was fully suspended. At 2:11, vendor notices went out to our top 6 carriers. At 2:19, the insurance broker confirmed no fleet assets could be transferred without my signature. Each confirmation landed quietly in my inbox. No shouting. No broken glass. No revenge. Just doors Natalie had assumed were open clicking shut one by one. Upstairs, Footsteps crossed the kitchen. A cabinet opened. Water ran. For one strange second, we were just a married couple awake in the same house after midnight. Then my phone lit up with a forwarded message Brandon had sent Natalie minutes earlier. We may need to accelerate before Elliot gets emotional. I stared at that word. Emotional. Men like Brandon always call you emotional when you stop being convenient. I saved the message, sent it to Miriam, and typed only one line back to myself in the Notes app because I needed to see it written plainly. I am not taking her life apart. I am removing my life from her plan. At 2:26 in the morning, the house finally went quiet above me. Natalie had ended the call, or maybe Brandon had. Either way, the silence did not feel peaceful. It felt like a room after someone leaves a loaded sentence behind and expects the walls to keep it. I sat in the basement office with the safe open, documents spread across the desk, and the glow of 3 monitors turning my hands pale. Outside the small window, the driveway was black except for the faint light spilling from the garage where the Mercedes waited under its charger. The car looked almost innocent from there. Machines do not know what people use them to prove. I opened the house trust folder next. Graham Family Trust. Established 12 years earlier after the first major expansion nearly collapsed under debt. I had created it because one lender's mistake and one bad quarter had taught me that success without structure is just panic with better furniture. Natalie signed the papers back then without reading half of them, joking that she trusted me with boring things so she could handle the inspiring things. I laughed at the time. That was what husbands do when disrespect is still dressed like affection. The trust owned the house, the land, and the separate workshop behind the property. Natalie had occupancy rights as my spouse, shared household access, and the lifestyle she liked presenting at dinner parties, but she did not have the right to borrow against it, transfer it, pledge it, or use it as collateral for Brandon's new shell company. Miriam had me scan the relevant pages anyway. "We are not removing her from the home tonight," she said over the phone. "We are making sure she cannot use it as leverage tomorrow." "Good," I said. "I do not want cruelty. I want boundaries." The words sounded strange in my mouth, maybe because I had spent so long confusing boundaries with selfishness. At 2:41, I found the draft lender package for NG Strategic Holdings. There it was in clean financial language: projected transition assets, executive residence credibility, fleet transfer potential, vendor continuity through existing operational leadership. Existing operational leadership. Me. They had not even planned to erase me all at once. They planned to stand on me until the bridge reached the other side, then pretend I was never part of the crossing. I forwarded the file to Miriam and Samuel. Samuel replied first. "Elliot, I am sorry. I knew Natalie was taking meetings, but I did not know they had gone this far." I stared at his message longer than I should have. There is a particular loneliness in learning that other people saw pieces of your humiliation before you did. Not because they wanted to hurt you, but because love is the last department to receive the memo. At 3:02, Miriam confirmed the trust notice had been drafted. At 3:08, the bank acknowledged hold status on any real estate-backed inquiry connected to Natalie or Brandon. At 3:16, our insurance broker sent written confirmation that no vehicle, property, or liability schedule could be reassigned without my authorization. The legal machinery moved without drama, and that made the emotional wreckage easier to hear. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I froze out of habit, like I was a boy caught somewhere he should not be, then almost laughed at myself. It was my house, my office, my company, my life. How long had I been moving quietly through things I owned, because Natalie preferred the illusion that I was only useful when unseen? I opened a blank document and began listing what needed to happen by sunrise. Suspend Brandon fully. Notify vendors. Protect payroll. Lock unauthorized transfers. Preserve evidence. Retrieve Mercedes formally. Cancel the morning board vote. Prepare disclosure packet. Each line was plain, clean, lawful. Each line pulled one thread out of the net she had thrown over me. At 3:31, I heard the bedroom door close upstairs. Natalie had gone to sleep inside a house she thought would wake up the same. I looked at the clock and then at the folder of contracts she had asked me to fix. I slid them into a drawer, unfinished. For once, the useful man would not finish the work that helped someone replace him. At 3:44 in the morning, the first real consequence reached Natalie's phone while she was asleep upstairs. Miriam sent the formal notice suspending Brandon Pierce's access to every Graham Freight Solutions system, citing unauthorized restructuring activity, attempted contract reassignment, and improper use of internal company communications. The email copied Brandon, Natalie, Samuel, our outside accountant, the bank officer, and 3 people Brandon had probably assumed would never see the mess behind his polished words. I watched the delivery confirmations appear one by one. There was no satisfaction in it. Satisfaction would have required me to enjoy the collapse. I did not. I only felt the cold relief of a man closing windows before a storm reached the furniture. At 3:52, Brandon tried to log into the shared strategy folder. Access denied. At 3:54, he tried the vendor transition file. Access denied. At 3:58, he called Natalie. I knew because her phone started vibrating through the ceiling, a dull buzz above my office like a trapped insect. It stopped, then started again, then stopped. I pictured her waking in the dark, confused, seeing his name, not mine, and understanding before she even opened the messages that something had shifted while she slept. My own phone rang at 4:02. Brandon. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, the transcript appeared. Elliot, this is being handled badly. We should talk like adults before you create unnecessary exposure. I stared at the word adults for a long time. Men like Brandon always discover professionalism after the door locks from the other side. I forwarded the voicemail to Miriam without replying. At 4:11, Samuel confirmed he had canceled the morning board agenda pending legal review. Not postponed. Canceled. The emergency proposal Natalie planned to use against me would never reach the table. I opened the agenda file anyway. There it was, modernization of executive authority, transition to founder advisory role, brand-led growth structure. Founder advisory role. They wanted to turn me into a photograph on a hallway wall, respected in language, removed in practice. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed both hands over my face. For the first time that night, exhaustion broke through the focus. The body always knows before pride admits it. I had been awake nearly 20 hours. My shirt collar felt stiff. My eyes burned. But beneath the tiredness was something cleaner than anger. Direction. At 4:24, the bank officer called. Her name was Denise Harper, and she had been with us since the second warehouse expansion. Elliot, she said, voice careful, we received counsel's notice. Nothing moves without your authorization. Thank you. She hesitated. For what it is worth, I am sorry. The proposed credit inquiry attached to the new entity raised concerns. You saw it before tonight? We saw enough to ask questions. There it was again. Other people seeing smoke before I admitted there was fire. I thanked her and ended the call before my voice changed. At 4:37, Miriam sent the summary packet. Brandon removed. Vendor assignments blocked. Fleet transfers frozen. Bank authority secured. Trust protected. Board vote canceled. Mercedes retrieval scheduled for 8 o'clock from the residence garage to the company lot. I read each line slowly. House. Cars. Company. Not taken from Natalie. Taken back from the plan. Upstairs, footsteps hit the floor hard. A door opened. Then Natalie's voice, sharp and frightened, called down through the house. Elliot. I closed the paw. Natalie called my name again from the top of the basement stairs, and this time it did not sound like a wife looking for her husband. It sounded like a president discovering the doors no longer opened for her. I heard her bare feet on the steps before I saw her. She came down in a cream robe, hair loose, phone clutched in one hand, the blue light from the screen making her face look younger and more frightened than she would have allowed in public. What did you do? She asked. Not what happened. Not are you okay? What did you do? Even in panic, she placed me in the role of disruption, the problem in the room, the useful thing that had finally malfunctioned. I placed the manila envelope on the desk between us. I protected the company. She looked at the envelope but did not touch it. Brandon says you locked him out of everything. Brandon never had authority to be in everything. Her jaw tightened. He is a consultant. He was using company systems to help you move company contracts into a new entity without authorization. Her eyes flickered. Small. Fast. The kind of flicker people make when they realize the conversation has documents now. That is not what it was. I opened the envelope and took out the first sheet. NG Strategic Holdings. Proposed transfer of 3 major vendor contracts. Staff transition schedule. Draft board proposal reducing my authority to a founder advisory role. I laid each page on the desk, one at a time. Paper has a way of making lies sit still. Natalie's face changed with every sheet. Anger first, then calculation, then fear. You went through my files, she said. You used company email, company folders, company data, company contracts, and company assets. There was no private drawer here, Natalie. There was a plan to remove me from my own business, while keeping me useful long enough to carry the transition. The word useful landed between us like a key dropped on tile. She looked away. That told me enough. She knew I had heard. For the first time that night, the room felt smaller than my pain. The basement office held everything she once called boring. Filing cabinets, insurance binders, maintenance logs, fleet reports, bank letters, framed certificates, old route maps, and the photograph I had turned face down earlier. She used to avoid this room because it smelled like paper, printer ink, and decisions that could not be dressed up for a camera. Now the whole life she presented upstairs depended on what this room had saved. Her phone rang again. Brandon. She silenced it, but did not decline fast enough. I noticed. So did she. He told me you would overreact, she said, softer now, trying a different door. He said you were too attached to the old way of doing things. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was perfectly shaped. Make the founder look emotional, outdated, possessive, then call the takeover modernization. The old way built payroll for 132 employees, I said. The old way kept trucks moving when your visionary interviews were still being edited. The old way signed the notes, carried the risk, and put your name on an office door because I thought marriage meant sharing the light. Natalie's eyes filled, but the tears came too late to steer me. I did not mean to erase you. No, I said quietly. You meant to use me until erasing me became convenient. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold in the room where I had been working all night. Above us, the house remained beautiful and unaware. Outside, the sky behind the basement window had shifted from black to the first hard blue of morning. I gathered the papers back into the envelope. The board vote is canceled. Brandon is locked out. Vendor transfers are blocked. Bank authority is frozen pending review. The Mercedes returns to the company lot at 8. Her head snapped up. My car. Company vehicle. This is our house. Trust property. Her voice broke on the next question. And me? I looked at the woman who had called me useful and finally saw how small usefulness becomes when love leaves it. You are my wife, I said. But by sunrise, you will not be the person using that word to take what you did not build. At 5:18 in the morning, Natalie followed me upstairs carrying the silence like it was heavier than the robe around her shoulders. The house looked different in that hour before sunrise. The marble counters were still polished. The tall windows still framed the dark yard. The expensive furniture still sat exactly where the designer had placed it, but the rooms no longer felt powerful. They felt staged. A beautiful set waiting for actors who had forgotten their lines. Natalie stood near the kitchen island while I made coffee, not because I wanted coffee, but because my hands needed something ordinary to do after a night of legal doors closing. Her phone kept lighting up on the counter. Brandon, Brandon, Brandon. She watched the screen each time, and each time she let it fade. That told me he had stopped sounding like strategy and started sounding like evidence. At 5:31, Samuel texted that the warehouse morning shift had opened normally, payroll was secure, and no vendor had accepted reassignment. I read the message twice. That was the part Natalie had. Never understood. The company was not the logo on her office wall or the photo under a magazine headline. It was people clocking in before daylight, trucks starting in cold yards, dispatchers drinking bad coffee, invoices matched, tires checked, insurance paid, families depending on Friday. You do not gamble with that because a brand consultant says your husband looks old-fashioned. Natalie finally spoke. Was any of it mine? The question came out small, but not innocent. I set my mug down. Your work was yours. Your speeches were yours. The relationships you built were yours. But the house was never a blank check. The Mercedes was never a personal trophy. The company was never a costume you could wear while someone else carried the risk. She looked toward the garage door, where the Mercedes waited for the retrieval notice like a verdict with leather seats. I thought I earned it. You earned respect for what you actually did, I said. Then you tried to convert respect into control over things you did not build alone. Her eyes filled again, but this time she did not try to make the tears useful. She just stood there with them. At 5:47, Brandon sent one final message that appeared across her lock screen. Do not admit anything. Let me handle Elliot. I almost laughed at that. Let me handle Elliot. Like I was a difficult vendor, a delayed shipment, a temporary obstruction in a plan already sold to investors. Natalie read it and closed her eyes. I was stupid, she whispered. You were cruel before you were stupid, I said. The sentence hurt both of us, but it stayed true. Outside, the first gray lights spread over the yard. The workshop roof appeared through the glass, then the outline of the old pickup parked beside it, the one I drove when I wanted to remember what honest work felt like before everything became titles and access codes. At 6:10, Miriam called. I put her on speaker. Everything is in place, she said. Bank freeze confirmed, vendor notices acknowledged, Brandon locked out, board agenda canceled, trust protected, fleet retrieval scheduled. Natalie, you should retain separate counsel before making any statement. Natalie stared at the phone like the morning had learned legal language. Am I being removed from the company? She asked. Miriam paused. Your authority is suspended pending review. Your employment is not terminated at this time. Do not contact vendors or staff about the restructuring. Pending review. The same kind of phrase Natalie had once used on employees she wanted to scare without sounding harsh. Now it sat in our kitchen wearing her name. The call. At 6:42 in the morning, the sun finally reached the kitchen windows, and for the first time all night, Natalie had nowhere left to hide behind lighting. The marble island still shone. The coffee still steamed. The house still looked like the kind of place she once photographed for holiday cards and donor dinners. But the image had lost its authority. She stood across from me in a cream robe, holding her phone with both hands, reading the same messages over and over as if repetition could reopen doors the documents had already closed. Brandon had stopped calling after Miriam's warning. That silence told its own story. Men like him do not stay for consequences they cannot invoice. At 7:03, a message from the company lot manager appeared on my phone. Retrieval team scheduled for 8. Vehicle will be stored under executive fleet review. I placed the phone face down. Natalie saw enough. You are really taking the Mercedes, she said. The company is retrieving a company vehicle. And the house. The house remains protected by the trust. And my position? I looked at the manila envelope between us. Suspended pending review. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You sound like a lawyer. No, I said. I sound like a man who finally read the room he built. Her face broke a little then. Not dramatically. Not for effect. Just enough for the truth to show through. I was afraid, she said. Afraid of what? Of becoming invisible next to you. That answer surprised me, not because it was noble, but because it was honest. I leaned back against the counter, exhausted enough that anger no longer had strength to stand. So you made me invisible first. She looked down. I told myself you did not care about the spotlight. I did not. I said, I cared about the marriage. I cared about the people on payroll. I cared about trucks leaving on time and loans getting paid and promises being kept. You mistook silence for permission. Her tears came then, quiet and useless, which made them feel more real than anything she had said on a stage. Can we fix this? She asked. I looked past her to the garage door, to the hallway, to the expensive rooms that had become too polished to feel like home. Not by sunrise, I said, and not with Brandon in your ear, or a shell company in your inbox, or me standing behind you pretending useful is the same as loved. She covered her mouth, and I picked up the old pickup keys from the counter. The truck waited outside near the workshop, dusty, plain, paid for twice over in hard years. It had no luxury badge, no executive package, no image to protect. It only started when I turned the key and carried what needed carrying. I walked toward the door with the envelope under my arm. Natalie followed me to the entryway, but did not try to stop me. Maybe she finally understood that a calm exit can be louder than a slammed door. I paused with my hand on the knob. You were right about one thing, I said. I was useful. Useful enough to build the company, useful enough to protect the house, useful enough to keep the cars moving, useful enough to save payroll in storms you never saw. I turned and looked at her one last time. But I am done being useful to people who only value me when I disappear. Outside, the morning was cold and clear. At the end of the driveway, the first company tow vehicle turned in right on time. coming for the Mercedes Natalie had mistaken for proof of ownership. I walked past it without looking back, opened the door of my old pickup, and set the manila envelope on the seat beside me. The engine turned over rough, then steady. In the rearview mirror, Natalie stood in the doorway of a beautiful house she could no longer use as a stage. Watching the life she tried to take apart return to its rightful hands before breakfast. I did not feel victorious. I felt awake. By sunrise, I had not taken her life. I had taken mine back.